Work like this is rarely simple. On ground like this, every step leaves a mark, and every decision has consequences, whether you notice them straight away or not. This job is in the leafy suburb of Eltham, in Melbourne's north, a part of the city where the bush still presses in fairly close, and the landscape tends to set the terms for how gardens take shape. This garden is shaped entirely by the hill. There's no separating the two. Every movement through the space is an interaction with the slope. Over time, the areas under pressure start to reveal themselves. Soil shifts, surfaces thin out, and certain lines become more travelled than others. When that starts happening, it's usually a sign that the landscape is ready for a bit more structure. I've done some work here previously, mainly low retaining to slow erosion across the slope. There's also this paved area further up the hill that has become a natural gathering point. One of the new parts will connect directly into that space, which helps everything feel more intentional rather than fragmented. Much of Eltham is shale. Once you get below the top layer, the ground turns hard very quickly. So with the hard shale, steep slope, and record-breaking temperatures, I've definitely got my work cut out for me on this job. On a hill like this, you start to notice where people naturally walk. Certain lines get used more than others, and over time, those areas begin to wear. The surface thins out, especially after rain, and the slope starts to erode pretty quickly. The aim here is not to invent new routes, but to support the ones already forming. These paths are not just decorative. They are working routes, designed to make movement easier on a slope that would otherwise be tiring and unstable. Along some sections of the path, low retaining is needed to hold the edge in place. The first step is digging the holes for the posts and setting them in concrete so that I have something to attach the sleepers to. Eltham sits on the edge of Melbourne's urban spread, but it's never really behaved like a suburb in the conventional sense. Long before houses and roads, this area was shaped by steep gullies, creeks, and dense bushland. The land here resisted easy clearing, which is one of the reasons it stayed relatively intact compared to flatter parts of Melbourne. In the early 20th century, Eltham became closely associated with artists, craftspeople, and designers who were drawn to that landscape rather than trying to tame it. The area developed a strong arts and crafts influence, favouring handmade materials, local stone, timber, and buildings that followed the contours of the land instead of flattening them. That mindset still lingers. Gardens here tend to work with slopes, trees, and natural movement. Paths curve because the land curves. Even today, Eltham holds onto that bush character more strongly than many inner suburbs. Kangaroos, wallabies, and birdlife are still part of daily life in many streets, and erosion, drainage, and access remain real, practical concerns rather than theoretical ones. Working on a hill like this feels very much in keeping with that history. The challenge is not how to dominate the slope, but how to move through it carefully, leaving as much of its character intact as possible. In this section, the main issue is surface movement due to the steep slope. Building one large retaining wall here would require engineering and permits, and it would change the character of the hill. Instead, I'm putting in a series of smaller walls to stabilise the area and create opportunities for planting, which will naturally help slow erosion and runoff. This section is pretty much solid rock, so it's time to get an old friend to give me a hand. The tallest wall is around 400 millimeters. Stepping the slope like this helps hold the ground in place, allows for planting, and makes the area more usable without introducing a dominant structure. The posts are cypress pine, which holds up well in ground contact and works reliably for this kind of structure. Setting up string lines helps keep the posts aligned and gives a clear sense of the path shape before they're set in concrete. The alignment follows the hill rather than fighting it, and by creating a gentle turn, It will help reduce the chance of water building speed down the surface. Once the concrete is set, I'm going to be attaching red gum sleepers to the posts to form the retaining for our path and for the terraces on the hill. They're durable, stable, and sit comfortably in this bush setting without drawing too much attention to themselves. Red gum is one of the hardest Australian hardwoods, which is exactly why it's been used outdoors for over a century. It's dense, tight-grained, and built to take a beating, so it works brilliantly for decks, steps, and heavy-duty retaining walls. It handles ground contact really well, with many red gum species rated Class 1 or Class 2 for durability, meaning it can last decades above and even in the ground when installed properly. It's a stunning timber, rich, warm, and full of character, but how sustainable it is depends entirely on where it comes from. Victoria has shut down commercial native forest logging, so you won't see red gum being cut from public forests like it used to. Most of what's still around is from older stock, private land harvests or plantations, which is why I'm careful to only use red gum from managed sources, rather than old growth or poorly regulated native forests. That's how you protect habitat, hauler-dependent wildlife, and the long-term health of these ecosystems. River red gums are incredible trees. They can live for hundreds of years, survive floods and droughts, and even regrow after losing most of their canopy. That's exactly why, when I do use red gum in landscaping, I'm really careful about where it comes from. Freshly cut, the timber is a deep, almost blood red colour, which is where the name comes from. Over time, that rich red mellows into warm browns and soft greys, giving it a naturally aged, lived-in look. If you want to keep the colour richer and more consistent, you can oil it. A good decking oil applied once or twice a year will slow UV grain, bring out the grain, and protect the surface without hiding what makes red gum so distinctive. The temperature is getting close to 40 degrees now, and I'm on about t-shirt number 5. I think that will do me today. The tools are actually getting too hot to pick up. The plan for this top section is to create a path linking the driveway to the paved area. It's already being regularly used as a path, so now we're just going to formalise it with surface material, shaping it into a soft, natural curve that feels like it belongs, rather than a straight, rigid line. I want the path to finish at the same height as the paving, so some of the soil will have to be removed to bring the level down and create a smooth transition. In the 1860s, Victoria was gripped by gold rush fever, and places like Eltham sat on the edge of that chaos. Miners, traders, and opportunists poured through the region, turning quiet tracks into rough supply routes, lined with makeshift huts, sly grog shanties, and basic services catering to anyone heading to the smaller goldfields in the Yarra Valley and nearby hills. Digging into this ground now shows how tough it would have been to chase gold here. The soil is shallow in parts, with hard shale and rock sitting not far below the surface, breaking up in studum chunks that don't give up easily. Miners would have swung picks and shovels into this same tough layer, sifting rubble and clay for tiny specks of gold, often for months with nothing to show for it. It wasn't only luck that was needed to find gold, it was brute persistence in an environment that didn't want to give anything up. It was a time of lawlessness, opportunity, and legend, with bushranger tales swirling around anyone moving gold through the bush. Eltham itself developed more as a timber and farming hub than as a major gold camp, but the energy of the rush shaped the district, bringing people, money, and stories that still echo in local folklore today. Even now, That history is still written into the land. The rock close to the surface, the shallow soils, and the way water moves through the slopes are the same conditions that shaped how people worked here more than a century ago. Very little about this ground is forgiving. It rewards patience rather than force, and it tends to resist anything that tries to move too quickly or too aggressively. Working in it today, you are reminded that this landscape has always asked people to slow down, pay attention, and adapt to what is there, rather than expecting it to bend easily to their plans. It's new boot day. They're about to take a serious beating, but look like they can handle it. By attaching plastic sheeting to the back of the sleepers, a simple barrier is created between the timber and the soil. It helps keep constant moisture off the wood, stopping water from sitting against it and slowing decay over time. With red gum, it's almost unnecessary. It already performs extremely well in ground contact, but it does no harm. It's a small layer of insurance without changing how the structure behaves. With the sleepers in place, the focus can shift to levelling out the path. The path is going to be granitic sand, but to help with drainage, a layer of crushed rock forms the base, giving the surface something firm to sit on and helping it hold its shape over time. When it's compacted, the rock locks together, which limits movement and reduces the chance of the path settling unevenly, especially on a slope like this. You might notice the plastic bands on some of the trees through here. These are possum bands. They're used to stop possums climbing up into the canopy, where repeated leaf stripping can stress trees badly over time, and in some cases lead to decline or death. It's a simple, non-invasive way to protect vulnerable trees from ongoing damage. In bush settings like this, repeated browsing can place a lot of stress on trees over time. Reducing that pressure early helps them stay healthy, especially through hot and dry periods like this one. This part of Victoria is stunningly beautiful, especially early in the day. It's cool and still now, but it's shaping up to be another hot one. These rocks will be used to retain the top path. They're granite, chosen to match the existing stone already used through the garden, so the path feels like a continuation of what's already there. Stone works well here because it allows the path to curve and respond to the slope. It makes the edge feel softer and more natural, helping the path flow through the garden rather than cutting across it. The stone edge changes depending on what the ground needs. In some places, it works as a small retaining wall, holding soil where the slope is under pressure. In others, only a few stones are used, just enough to support the edge and keep things in place. That variation helps the path feel informal and natural, rather than reading as a continuous, formal structure. To help hold the surface in place, a cellular-based system called natural paving is being used. It's made by Stroll, a New Zealand company, and is produced from 100% recycled materials. The system sits beneath the granitic sand. Once it is filled, it becomes invisible, but it plays an important role in how the path performs. The cellular structure helps lock the surface together, which limits movement and reduces the tendency for the sand to migrate downhill during heavy rain. It allows water to pass through freely, rather than running across the surface, which improves drainage and helps reduce erosion over time. The product itself is recycled plastic, but it's designed for long-term use below ground, where it reduces ongoing maintenance, repeated material replacement, and sediment movement through the garden. On a slope like this, that trade-off makes practical sense. Although its recommended use is with toppings and smaller aggregates, I've found that it also works really well for granitic sand. If you're interested in finding out more about it, I'll put a link to the product in the description. Look at this little guy, a marbled gecko. They're really common around here, but this isn't the best spot for him. He's a bit cold and slow, so I'll move him somewhere safer before he gets hurt. They're generally seen as a native lizard that helps control insects, but experts think they actually got into Melbourne via transported building materials and rocks from other parts of Australia. That checks out. Seems like this guy hitched a ride in the granitic sand. Granitic sand is a beautiful material for bush settings. Its colour sits naturally in the landscape, it's permeable, and it feels comfortable underfoot in a way harder surfaces never quite do. It suits gardens like this because it doesn't try to dominate the space and instead settles in quietly. It also works well with water. Rain can move through it rather than running across the surface, which helps avoid puddling and keeps the path feeling soft and informal rather than sealed and rigid. Visually, it blends in. Over time, it weathers gently, picking up leaf litter, dust, and subtle changes in tone that help it settle into its surroundings. The challenge with granitic sand is that it is honest about how it behaves. On a slope, it wants to move. Heavy rain can slowly pull material downhill, thinning the surface in high traffic areas and building it up in others. The steeper the ground, the more noticeable that movement becomes. On flatter sites, this is much less of a concern. Occasional topping up is usually enough. Here, with the constant fall of the land and regular foot traffic, it was something that needed to be addressed from the beginning, rather than managed later. That is where the cellular system comes into play. By supporting the sand from underneath, it allows the surface to behave more predictably. The path still looks and feels like granitic sand, but it is far less likely to migrate, thin out, or need regular correction after heavy weather. During very heavy downpours, the top layer will still shift slightly, as it should, but the bulk of the material remains in place, held by the cells beneath. The aim is not to lock the surface in place completely, but to guide how it moves. Done this way, the path stays usable, drainage is maintained, and the material can age naturally without becoming a maintenance problem in the future. Granitic sand suits areas like this for a reason. Soils around Eltham and through Melbourne's northeast tend to be shallow and variable, shaped by underlying geological material rather than deep loams, which influences how water moves after rain. Using materials that reflect that landscape helps the garden feel settled rather than imposed. The path does not pretend the ground is something it isn't. It works with what is already here. The soil through this area is difficult to work with. Once you get below the surface, it quickly turns to shale and rock, which makes it hard for plants to establish and thrive without some help. For now, some compost will be worked through the soil to start improving conditions, but planting at this time of year would be working against the weather. All planting will happen in autumn, when the heat has eased. At that point, larger planting holes will be dug and backfilled with fresh compost and potting mix, giving the plants the best possible chance to establish in what's otherwise a very tough location. The local arborist chipped up some dead trees on the property, so rather than letting that material go to waste, the mulch will be spread back through the garden. Mulch is one of the simplest things you can add to a slope, but it makes a real difference. It helps protect the soil surface, slows evaporation, and protects the ground during heavy rain, rather than letting water hit bare soil and run straight off. Over time, it breaks down and feeds the soil beneath, which is especially important in an area like this, where the ground is thin and rocky. Breaking the hill into smaller terraces does not remove the slope, but it changes how the ground behaves. Movement becomes more gradual, water slows down, soil has more opportunity to settle. It also opens the door for planting, which is one of the most effective ways to stabilise a slope long term. Plants do what hard structures alone cannot. Their roots bind soil, absorb water, and soften the visual impact of retaining. Combined with mulch, they help the garden move toward a more stable, self-supporting system, rather than something that constantly needs correcting. The hill is still steep. That has not changed, and nor should it. The goal was never to erase its character, only to make movement easier, reduce erosion, and allow the garden to settle more comfortably into itself. Over time, the materials will soften, plants will establish, and the paths will feel as though they have always been here. Working on slopes like this is less about control and more about understanding. The land usually tells you what it needs. The job is to listen carefully enough to respond with restraint.